There's been rapid change this election season. Just a little over a month ago, a gunman attempted to assassinate former President Donald Trump. And immediately after, the Republican National Convention drew together party leaders in Milwaukee. Just days after that convention ended, Biden decided to drop out of the race. Right after this transition was happening, a group of pollsters from GenForward and UChicago's Institute of Politics took a temperature check of young voters, a mix of Gen Zers and millennials. And joining us now is the executive director of the Institute of Politics, Zeenat Rahman. Hi, Zeenat. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sasha. Great to be with you.
Also here is Cathy Cohen, who's a pollster and political science professor for University of Chicago. Hey, Professor.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. So, Professor, before we get into what the voters surveyed had to say, I do want to get a little background first.
Sure.
So your poll was administered. It was right after President Biden said, I'm giving up this nomination.
Yes.
Y'all can check in with Kamala Harris, right?
Yes.
How were young people feeling about him around that time?
Look, there was no depth of warmth for Joe Biden at that moment. We saw real slippage in terms of the Democratic base. So young Black respondents who traditionally will turn out for the Democratic candidate were starting to move to a secondary or a third candidate. Some young Black men were saying that, in fact, they would think about and vote for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So generally, as we know already, they wanted someone else, and then they got someone else on the 21st.
And when we talk about these young people, give us an idea of the age range we're speaking of here.
So we're looking at 18 to 40. That's a huge range. Actually, when we're talking about young people, but we're talking about Gen Zers and millennials, and we can separate those by age. But in this survey, there weren't a lot of differences actually by age.
Yeah. How did this compare to past presidents, what they were saying about Biden?
Generally, there's a Democratic base that is solidified for the Democratic candidate, the person at the top of the ticket. What we saw was that, again, young people wanted generally neither candidate. When you gave them the option to say, do you think, in fact, you want someone else? They wanted someone else.
Yeah.
But it was July, so possibly a significant group would go back to the Democratic base, to the top of the ticket if Biden had stayed. But there was just a general relief that we're seeing and a movement towards Harris, given her new positioning.
Mm-hmm. Zeenat, major Democratic leaders coalesced around Harris when that happened, right? When that transition happened. But what did your survey show as far as support for Kamala Harris?
Well, so I think that many young people have been energized by Harris entering the ticket and Biden exiting, maybe more relevantly, Biden exiting the ticket. And I think it is, there wasn't any enthusiasm about a rematch of the Trump-Biden. And so I think there are two things here. One is that there's enthusiasm about Harris. She'll have to convert that around bread and butter issues, which we'll get into. I think the second thing when I talk to young people around the Institute of Politics is that this demonstrated for them a responsiveness to, to the calls to action that we're been putting out. And I think they're maybe used to those calls going unheard. And so the fact that that shift actually happened and they saw some sort of responsiveness or a change in a system that they feel is very entrenched and unmovable was the other thing that came out of Harris.
Yeah, looking at some specifics here, it increased from 33% for Biden in the GenForward May survey to 38% for Harris in that survey. Wow. Now, it also showed, as you mentioned, Professor, young men of color.
Yes.
They continue to say that they aren't supportive of either candidate. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, there are two things I want to say is if you remember, Biden steps out on the 21st. We actually go into the field on the 22nd. So I would say that what you're seeing is a conservative representation of support for Harris. That continued to grow while we were, quote unquote, in the field, but most of the responses came early on. So I think if we went in with a survey right now, there'd be even greater support for Harris.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
The second point I will say is there's a significant group of young men of color who either say they're going to vote for someone else or they're going to vote for Trump. In a previous survey, we asked questions about why might you vote for example, Trump? And I think what they see is a certain type of masculinity, a performance of masculinity, a performance of strength. We ask a question about, do you think the economy was better under Trump? For young whites and young Latinx respondents, they say yes to that. When we ask the same question about Biden, majorities across racial groups say no. So I think there's a sense that, in fact, maybe they will have a better job. It will be better for their communities and their families. There's a sense of strength. Maybe they believe, in fact, that the president will, that President Trump will provide some opportunities that Biden didn't.
Yeah.
But so I think it's a complicated matter for young men.
Interesting. We've heard a lot about disillusionment with the system from this group, Zeenat. What else did you find?
Well, so I mean, I think when you poll respondents, and 3 out of 5 are saying they have a low level of confidence in that democracy is working for them today. Like that's something that we should examine and look at further. And I think when you think of Gen Z, for example, they were in 7th grade when Trump was elected president. So on the political side,
Right.
They've only known political dysfunction and polarization. At the same time, they have a front row seat to social media and everything going on in the world, good and bad, mostly bad, and they feel a personal sense of agency to do something about that. And my experience bears out that they are doing something about that. This is not an apathetic generation. We did, not with this poll, but a man on the street interview, and kind of said, do you think your vote matters? And to a person, they all said, yes, we think our vote matters. I also just have groups regularly of student leaders at the Institute of Politics who are, for example, going to the Cook County jails and doing, voter education training. We have groups who are organizing around addressing the migrant crisis on the South Side in Hyde Park in our neighborhoods. And so they feel a sense of agency. They need to feel their government as being responsive to the things that they feel are not working, which is economic growth, inflation, housing affordability, income inequality. They need government to step up because they feel that they're stepping up.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, sometimes I think people are surprised when young people say the democracy isn't working. It's not working for significant numbers of young people of color in particular.
I mean, people are surprised when young people speak up about politics. Right.
I mean, they have an expansive understanding of the democracy. They want to make sure, in fact, that the police stop killing Black people, that the government stops bombing innocent Palestinians, right? For them, that is another example of what democracy means in terms of its working. And so they're saying, no, this doesn't work for us.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, this is Reset. I'm Sasha Ann Simons. A new national poll by GenForward and the University of Chicago is some of the first data collected after the switch from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. And we're looking specifically at a youth voter survey, which shows the top issues for young people this election season. Our guests are Zeenat Rahman, who's executive director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, and Cathy Cohen, who's a pollster and political science professor for the University of Chicago. So I want to dig into the issues here. What was the top election issue, Professor Cohen?
Overwhelmingly, person by person, group by group, it is inflation. It's the economy. We've been joking, it's the economy stupid again. As Zeenat said, these are young people who have dealt with at least 2 recessions in 2007 and the COVID recession. These are young people who are less likely to own a home than their parents were at this stage, who carry more student debt, who go into the grocery store and have to deal with the high prices of groceries, who worry about if they'll be able to pay their rent.
Yep.
So over and over again, no matter how we slice the data, when we say what is the issue driving you this November, it is income inequality, but fundamentally it's inflation.
Our money. I'm hearing more and more young people say they feel like that dream of home ownership, it's just slipping away.
That's right.
Right.
They're also burdened by student loans. So I'm not at all surprised that the economy is the top issue for them.
Right. Well, I was going to say that, housing affordability really standing out in terms of being an issue of dire concern to this generation. And, many of them, home ownership is not even the thing they're thinking about. They're wondering how they're going to pay their rents.
Yeah.
And so, you've seen the Harris campaign make some moves to be responsive to probably the same polling, the same information that they're getting from their polling, but really thinking about, young people exiting college. They're not trying to buy a home right now. Mm-hmm. They might be trying to afford their rent, pay their student loans, those kinds of things. And so I think
I'm
both
thinking
of the
about the
campaigns,
40-year-olds in your
That's what
in
I
your
was going
group.
to say, who have children and
Because
are
I may
thinking
or may not be among those people you're talking about, and home ownership is slipping away.
No, it's true.
Like, we hear that the economy is strong with record low unemployment. Your survey found that 56% of voters in this age group feel that the economy is somewhat or very poor. I mean, what do you think that that's all suggesting overall here, Professor?
Well, I think there's a kind of, I want to be careful how I say this, that at least President Biden seems to be out of touch. You know, we heard last night over and over again, this is the strongest economy in the world. People don't feel that on a day-to-day basis, and young people definitely don't feel that. And I think, to Zeenat's point, this is the pivot that Harris is making, right? To say, I understand that, in fact, you are suffering economically. I want to address that. And we can think about how the economy is functioning at some levels, but it has not, to use the language of trickled down into the kind of daily lives of young people, and they're demanding something different.
And this is across party lines?
It is across party lines. It's pretty amazing. You know, generally when we ask what's the most important question, we see real differences based on race or college, non-college, but across party lines, across racial groups, across college, non-college, young people are saying inflation or economic issues.
And Zeenat, the second most important issue among Republicans or Democrats, what else were people concerned about?
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Well, okay, so I'll say, if you look at Democrats, they are, and I want to be careful about this, the second most important issue for them is abortion and reproductive rights. That is a critical issue. The reason I say we want to be careful is because that really does vary. A lot of that is being pushed by young white women or Asian Pacific Islander young women.
Okay.
If we ask young black women, abortion doesn't rise to the same level of importance. But if you're looking at the Democrats, it's largely
Reproductive
inflation
rights.
and then reproductive rights.
Interesting. And Republicans, I saw from your survey, immigration was top of mind.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say yes. So again, a number of economic issues, and then we get to immigration. Now, their take on immigration is not necessarily the same take that others might have. There is this kind of concern about the border. It is not a concern for the condition of migrants who enter the country. So we want to be careful when we say immigration, as it varies across different groups. But for Republicans, it is the sense of and the narration of the border is out of control. Migrants are taking your jobs, and that's part of the reason you're having the economic issues that you have. Yeah.
Last week on the program, we talked with a Gen Z voter, and he told us his top issue was Gaza. Is that reflective in your poll, Zeenat?
No, not at all. And so, you know, whereas it is top of mind. We both work on a college campus. You know, we live in the city of Chicago with very large Arab and Muslim populations. Gaza only rated at 3% of when asked what's the most important issue in the election for you. And so, whereas I think it's top of mind for many people, the polling did not bear out that this is something that people are going to go vote on. But I do want to say that, you know, 50% of the people who were polled did disapprove of Biden's handling of the war in Gaza.
Okay.
And there are high levels of consensus. 46% of young adults approve for sending humanitarian aid. 43% disapprove of sending military aid to Israel. So there's nuance within that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't kind of the primary issue. Again, it was the economy. It was concerns around inflation.
It was on their minds, just not top.
Yes. Well, I was just going to say this is the limits of a national survey, right? Because in fact, Zeenat is right that Gaza doesn't rise to the top issue. However, this is a national survey. If we went into Michigan, which will be a critical state, it is a critical issue. And so trying to kind of pay attention to both what's happening at the state level and what's happening at the national level.
You know, and then when you look at on the cross section of the AAPI young adults, particularly AAPI young women, 61% of young AAPI young women stand out in their opposition to Israel's war in Gaza.
So it really depends on where you're asking, right, and who you're talking to. Yeah. We've been speaking about a poll of youth voters with Zeenat Rahman, who's executive director at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, and Cathy Cohen, who's a pollster and political science professor for the University of Chicago. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting breakdown.